BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Okay, today we're going to be talking about Marianne Williamson again, but first I would like to begin by reading something from FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. A wise government seeks to provide the opportunity through which the best of individual achievement can be obtained. For too many of us, political equality we once had and won was meaningless in the face of economic inequality. A small group had concentrated into their own hands in almost complete control over other people's property, other people's money, other people's labor, other people's lives. For too many of us, life was no longer free. Liberty no longer real. Men could no longer follow the pursuit of happiness. Against economic tyranny such as this, the American citizen could appeal only to the organized power of government. The collapse of 1929 showed up the despotism for what it was. The election of 1932 was the people's mandate to end it. Under that mandate, it is being ended. The royalists of the economic order have conceded that political freedom was the business of the government, but they have maintained that economic slavery was nobody's business. They granted that the government could protect the citizen in his right to vote, but they denied that the government could do anything to protect the citizen in his right to work and his right to live. And yes, that is from FDR, as we said, and that was actually from a convention speech that he made at the Democratic National Convention in 1936. What does this have to do with Marianne Williamson? Well, when I was reading that, I was greatly reminded by Marianne Williamson's A Politics of Love, something that we had been discussing on this channel. And I think, though, there's a very valuable thing that she kind of says at the beginning of A Politics of Love when we are not going to have any success in America, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, until we have leaders who actually believe the tenets of what America is supposed to be about. To have people believe that all men are created equal, that people actually believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It doesn't matter what type of political system we have. It does not matter what type of economic system we have. I mean, look at all the stuff that FDR is talking about. Look about I saying, okay, well, we have the right to vote, but then the system is just being manipulated by individuals to take away other people's right to work and other people's right to live. And, I mean, those are very extreme words, but the basic premise is just that people are being denied their rights. Why? Because of greed. Like, you ever heard that speech from Charlie Chaplin during The Great Dictator? Greed has poisoned men's souls. And one of the things that we have to be very much aware of is, until we have that sense of integrity in the political system, when people are actually believing in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone, and that not only all men are created equal, but how about all humans are equal, then it's going to stay the same. We will have the same sort of problems in America. And it's not really my own idea. Like I said, I got this from reading Marianne Williamson and listening to her on the campaign trail. But, I mean, I think there's a very valuable thing that she does contribute. And I was looking at Marianne Williamson compared to some of the other candidates, and okay, some of the candidates talk a little bit more about economics, some of them talk a little bit more about healthcare, some of them talk a little bit more about foreign policy. And I began to think, what would we really say about Marianne Williamson? Is she just about philosophy or something like that? And I really would hope not, because I would hope that a person who's on the presidential campaign trail would be a little bit more than just philosophy or political thinking. But at the same time, I think that she touches on many things in the psychology of American politics, as well as just values and integrity. And I mean, what about all these things that the Democrats are trying to talk about in the 2019 primary, in the 2020 primary? We're going to have the general election coming up sooner than we think. It's going to happen before we know it. But if you see, though, when you have this type of system, it's really just turns into how can certain groups manipulate the system to their advantage and take rights away from some people so that this smaller group will have more power. This is the basic concept of oligarchy, and it seems very clear that the mechanism that allows oligarchy to propagate is very alive and well in the United States of America. America is not immune to the concept of oligarchy, and oligarchy is one of the more difficult things to notice because, say for example, you got something like an aristocracy. That is done by bloodline. When you have royalism, okay, well, you can see very clearly these people are of royal blood, these people are the princes, the dukes, the duchess, all of those things. That's very visible. Economic royalism, the royalists of the economic order, as FDR was talking about, that's a little bit more difficult to notice because it doesn't matter if you have money. Just because you're rich, that doesn't mean that you have an enormous amount of influence over the political system, or you can completely shift the public sector to your advantage. Even if you have $1 billion in the United States of America, you can't completely shift the public sector to your advantage. Oligarchy is about the few. It is about a very small select group of individuals that can manipulate the political system to their advantage based on establishment connections. But what Marianne Williamson really talks about is that's only half the problem, describing that. You also have to have people who are trying to, like, you have to people that want to shift the system who have the sense of honesty and integrity and are honoring these types of values. Like, I mean, people can manipulate the system for destructive purposes. Okay, that's just identifying the problem. That's just describing the situation. Well, where do we go from there? Well, it's like we're going to, I think if I cannot comprehend what she was saying in A Politics of Love, we're going to have good actors who are going to be on the side of the people, and that's going to be more difficult than it seems, because if you've looked at anything such as polling, and I know polls don't prove anything, the candidates that are actually on the side of the people, or in her not super mainstream, not super establishment, often tend to kind of fall somewhat downward. And I think a lot of that is the way that the mainstream media chooses to portray them, the way the mainstream media chooses to present different sides of the candidates. They want to show off the perhaps more establishment candidates because of the connections in between the mainstream media and the major political committees, like the Democratic National Committee and the RNC as well. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The mainstream media is a horrendously political operation. Like, there's an enormous amount of power in the mainstream media. It has its own power dynamic, and it has its own political power dynamic. But once again, though, like, until we're going to, I mean, we can talk about trying to change the economic system. We can talk about instituting new policies. But if you look at some of these things here, talking about economic tyranny, talking about how certain people are trying to hoard the wealth for themselves and hoard the power for themselves. Okay, they're telling people that they will still have the right to vote. Well, if they just manipulate the political system in a certain way, then the right to vote won't be as valuable. And Noam Chomsky was talking about this for as long as we can remember, right? Manufacturing consent and all of those things. And even if you just look at an election where it's where both sides are both controlled by the same political forces, or both sides are both on the sides of both candidates are on the side of the political establishment, that is also going to lead to something that is going to give us just the same old status quo over and over again. It will not bring about any change into the political dynamic. And I think it's valuable to hear somebody like Marianne Williamson talk about how it's always going to be that way. You can talk about instituting certain policies. You can talk about having this new policy that you're going to put into action, this new political plan. Well, what if we just get this type of healthcare bill passed? But it's like we're never going to be having any real political change until our leaders are actually looking out for humanity. There's another school of thought out there where it's like we will have true change in America once those in power try to make decisions that benefit those with the least amount of power. And they're like, they actually have somebody that's on their side. But I don't necessarily know if that is something that's valuable, because I almost feel like that's somewhat of an oversimplification. I mean, yes, of course, we need to get our leaders to care about the people, and not only care about their own power dynamics. But it really feels like it's easier said than done. And I don't know about you guys, when you're trying to sort of look at, how do you bring change to the world? You could listen to that thing from Gandhi, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world," which Marianne Williamson talks about as well. Or you could just sort of be like, all right, I'm going to take the world head on, and demand political change. And whew, I gotta tell you, that's like you're a mouse and the world is a mountain. And it's difficult. And it's difficult to be very persuasive. It's difficult to get people to change their minds. It's difficult to present people with a new form of anything. And so many things are about charisma and persuasion tactics. You can study those things and they'll give you a little bit of a benefit. But in reality, it's like it's a very difficult operation that we're going up against. However, though, in terms of economic tyranny, I mean, I think the biggest thing that she's trying to contribute to the discussion is when it's called the politics of love, that means that this civilization is going to have to share a certain sense of love and compassion for the people. The leadership is going to have to be caring about the people. Because I will tell you right now, I mean, it seems like our sort of leaders in Washington, D.C. do not care about anything other than gridlock. Have you ever heard about that stuff when it's just like the situation is not meant to change? They could bring about solutions, but they don't want to because it's not profitable at certain times. And I mean, I think we have to be flat out understanding that people are going to want to earn money. Yes. But one of the ways that has also been proposed about how you can deal with that is if you think that there is something that is much more valuable, whether it's the people who are talking about green energy or the people who are talking about a new form of healthcare, a new healthcare plan or something like that, you have to create a market for it. Because let's not kid ourselves, the American people love earning money, and earning money is not the most evil thing in the world. Money does not have to be the root of all evil. It's more about the way that what people choose to do with their sort of financial transactions and their economic decision making. They can choose not to be putting themselves into economic tyranny and trying to become the masters and the overlords and just exploit people for their own selfishness. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And until we're going to get people to sort of kind of begin to think in a different way, this goes back to some of the things we mentioned in the revolution of consciousness about how political policies are one thing, but getting people to think in a different way is so much more valuable, because that can actually bring about change on a cultural level. And culture, now that's another hard thing to change. But I would just like to ask you, what exactly would you say, if you're interested in Marianne Williamson, what would you say that she really brings to the majority of the discussions? What does she have that the other candidates do not have? I mean, if you don't think that she has anything, if you don't like her at all, you can also say that in the comments section below. But I'd be very curious what anyone would have to say about something like that, because, as I mentioned, some candidates will talk a lot about healthcare, some talk a lot about foreign policy, some talk a lot about income inequality, and they have their economic reasons why. And I really just, you can challenge my statement as well when I would say that I would hope that a candidate would not focus their primary thing on just the philosophy behind politics, and I don't think that Marianne does, because I think she also talks about some things, like as we said, psychology, spirituality is a big thing. I mean, a politics of love, that is a spiritual statement. They always introduce Marianne Williamson as a spiritual teacher. I really don't see philosophy and spirituality on the same level. I think there's a big differentiation there. Feel free to challenge me on that in the comments section as well. And just the last thing is, I'd say the other thing, though, that Marianne Williamson is just talking about is just kind of the political science of it all. Yes, political science. Most people wouldn't think of Marianne Williamson as a political scientist, but when she talks about the need for honesty and integrity and love in the political system, it's like you have to have people believing in the tenets of the United States of America, to believe all these words that were written in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution and the Gettysburg Address, even a nation by and for the people. When you have all of these things and they actually have to follow through on these so-called values that are written down that we're supposed to be upholding, because if she's contributed anything to the discussion, you can see very clearly that our leaders in Washington are not upholding these values as well as they could be. Well, that's all for me now. Like I said, if you want to challenge me on any of the things that we've talked about in this upload, please drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And until next time.